So from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, my name is Carlene Thomas, and I've been asked to share a song with you. The song that we will share is our Eagle Song. We have been taught since we were little that the importance of the eagle to our culture. It's the bird that flies the highest in the sky. Therefore, it carries our thoughts and prayers and messages to our ancestors and to the Creator. So the next time you see an eagle flying around in our beautiful skies up here, send out some good energy, send out some good thoughts for yourself, for your families, for your friends, for your community, for our earth.
Capilano University. I was going to try to use the Squamish name for this room. I might get the courage to do it later, but I'll work on that. My name is Michael Markwick, and I have the privilege of teaching at this university and in the School of Communication. I call your attention to a sign-up sheet that is going around the room. That sheet is significant for the purposes of our gathering today. This is not, if you will, a town hall meeting. It's not a public meeting. This is a meeting with a very specific purpose, and that purpose is to more deeply enter into our understanding of the concerns that are expressed by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and the Squamish Nation concerning the future of our region, and to envision a future that is more secure for all of us, and against the risks that you will hear described of the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. With these in mind, I'd like to ask Mayor Derek Corrigan to take the microphone. This, as far as I understand, is the first time you've been able to be together in the same room, and we're deeply honored that you have chosen this occasion for it. So everyone, Mayor Derek Corrigan.
Well, thank you very much for the very kind invitation. First of all, I bring greetings to everyone from the City of Burnaby, from our council, our staff, but particularly on behalf of our citizens. I also bring greetings to my friends of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and the Squamish Nation who are here with us today. It is a great partnership that is forming between the municipalities and our First Nations in regard to this particular issue, and likely to be a partnership that continues as we deal with other issues that affect all of our communities. After all, we're all on the same land, and this is the traditional land of the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish Nations. It is the traditional land of the Salish people. Is that we are also people who have a deep and abiding love for this land. My family first came to British Columbia in the 1850s and then again in the 1870s, and became part of building this province, whether they were miners or foresters, and have continued to imbue in my generation a love for this province and a deep affection for the environmental values that are so important to our future. So as the mayor of Burnaby, our city has been a city that has prided itself in being successful in protecting our natural heritage. Our city is 1/4 park, which is an incredible accomplishment when you consider the density of urban areas. We continue to ensure that we put into public hands all of the land along the Fraser River to protect the salmon habitat. And so unlike in other cities, all of the Fraser River is owned by the public and is open to the public. And we continue to acquire land along Burrard Inlet to ensure that public access is available right along the whole of our coastline on the Burrard Inlet. So we have again put as a high priority how we treat the lands within our own community. Over the last little while, I have had to deal far more with issues that involve international oil and multinational corporations than I would have liked to. It started in 2007 when I first became aware of what could happen if in fact there was a spill, if in fact oil was allowed to escape from those pipelines into our community. In 2007, during a construction project being handled by a contractor, the contractor accidentally hit one of the pipelines. They did so because there had been a failure on the part of Kinder Morgan to send out the necessary staff to supervise the work that was being done close to their pipeline. In fact, under legislation, they had committed that they would actively participate in any work that came close to the pipeline to ensure there were no breaks. They went out, had a look at it, said looks good enough, went back to the office, and the contractor made a mistake and hit the pipeline, and suddenly there was a spill. We found out exactly how well Kinder Morgan was able to control an emergency situation immediately thereafter. Is that Kinder Morgan had a communication go back from their offices indicating that there had been a breach in the pipeline. When they received that breach, they decided rather than turning the oil off at the top of the mountain and avoiding any more oil flowing into the pipeline, they would turn the oil off at, in fact, the freighter that was to receive the oil. That meant, obviously, the oil backed up. And what would have been a relatively minor spill got even worse. The oil was spraying all over homes, all through our community, onto our roadways, into our creeks, and heading down towards Burrard Inlet. Luckily, our staff at the city, our fire department, and our staff went out and began work immediately. And I was out there myself within minutes to make sure that what we were doing was the very best job we could for the residents first, who were under some considerable stress, and for the environment, and ensuring that we did not have any greater impact on the environment. Kinder Morgan and the resources that were put into place took a very long time in order to get out there. In fact, putting on the resources was extremely difficult for them because all of those resources are contracted out to Burrard Clean and other outfits who do this work. So you had to go through a bureaucracy of notifying them to come to the project, to begin to deal with absorbent materials. They had to bring out special forces, and it took, really in our terms, it took forever for them to actually be onto the site and deal with it. We spent literally years afterwards cleaning up the mess. Even though we had oil interceptors in our sewer lines, even though we had done everything we could to protect our environment from the normal wear and tear that happens on our city roads, we were overwhelmed by this oil spill. It was massive, and it took all of our resources to try to prevent it going into Burrard Inlet. We all knew that if it was allowed to get there, that likely those impacts wouldn't just be years, they would be generational. And so trying to prevent that was our first goal. Subsequently, Kinder Morgan was moving people out of their homes into hotels while they went in to clean up. People were worried about their health because this oil had basically atomized as a result of the spill. And so it was spread as a thin layer across home after home and across lawn after lawn throughout the community. And it caused us to realize at that point that these oil lines going through the city of Burnaby and through other communities all through the lower mainland were a significant public danger. The potential for these oil lines to have a rupture and the inability of the company, Kinder Morgan, to be able to react properly after those ruptures occur created a situation that really was untenable for our city. So you can imagine my surprise when they came back in and saying, we want to twin this pipeline. And you can imagine the warm reaction they got. Kinder Morgan is a multinational corporation who has taken over the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And just let me step back and tell you what the Trans Mountain Pipeline was all about. The Trans Mountain Pipeline was originally put in as a result of a cooperative effort by refineries in the lower mainland who wanted to be able to get oil from Alberta to service British Columbia. And so there was the Shell refinery, the Petrochem refinery, the Chevron refinery. All of them worked cooperatively to get this pipeline developed. So it would allow them to be able to put oil into their refineries and produce oil for our needs. Well, what's happened as a result of multinational corporations' decisions, gradually all of those refineries have been closed. And the only one left standing is the Chevron refinery, which is still in the city of Burnaby. In fact, the Chevron refinery is the only refinery that's producing oil in British Columbia. So we're in a situation where we are dependent on foreign manufacture of the oil that is in fact taken from Canada. So that oil is sent away to the United States and it is returned to us in a refined form. So you can imagine the irresponsibility of that. Closing refineries so you can't have oil in your own community, sending it somewhere else by tanker, and then bringing it back by tanker so that you can begin to utilize that oil. Insanity. So anyway, they all closed, and so the Chevron refinery is left as being one of the few that's still accepting oil out of there, and it's a relatively minor portion. It's about a quarter of that oil is going to the Chevron refinery now. And in fact, even the Chevron refinery is finding that with the oil that's available and they're trying to export, they refuse to provide the oil that is necessary to keep the Chevron refinery going. So now Chevron is making an application to the National Energy Board to please let them continue to get enough oil to be able to run the existing refinery with the 200 people that work there, and the fact they're providing oil for our diesel, for our gas, and particularly for jet fuel for the airport. So I'm busy, and it's ironic, I'm busy also defending Chevron's interest to persuade the National Energy Board to please let the Canadian company get some oil. Because if we don't have that oil, we're not going to be able to supply our own needs. The argument that's being presented, for those of you who are aware of our national treaty agreements, is that we seem more inclined to make treaties with the United States than we are with our First Nations. But with the agreements we have, including NAFTA, say that now we are not permitted, and they're arguing that we're not permitted to be able to guarantee that enough oil goes to the Chevron refinery to supply that refinery, because NAFTA says that we're not entitled to do that, that it's a free market, open system, and therefore that oil can all be exported to the United States and our refinery will dry up and blow away. Amazing. Another little fact I've learned as a result of this. We were approached by Kinder Morgan, and Kinder Morgan purchased what was Trans Mountain, this line that was originally built. Kinder Morgan purchased it. And Kinder Morgan has a reputation. If you take a look at them on the net, you will find that Kinder Morgan has a series of spills all over the United States. I mean, their reputation preceded them as they came into our community. One of our biggest worries was that they were notorious for a failure to be able to look after their infrastructure, that consistently these problems had arose. And so the reputation they came in with was one which we were worried about. And to have them come back and tell us that they're going to twin a line now in order to more than double the capacity of oil going through our community and into tankers in Burrard Inlet is absolutely unbelievable. I don't know if you saw just recently, but the most recent article in the Vancouver Sun shows you that in Abbotsford, in the Sumas area, they just spilled another 90,000 liters in January. That was kept quiet as it went to the National Energy Board. Now 90,000 liters, that's probably the equivalent of the amount of beer that's drank at the Capilano University over the course of a year. And that's a lot of oil. That's a lot of oil to be released at one time. So 90,000 liters escaped. And you know how it escaped? It's because they consistently ignored their own warning system. They consistently refused to go out and check whether in fact the leak was actually occurring. And so the bells were going off telling them the leak happened. Nobody's going out to check whether in fact it really is a leak until 90,000 liters of oil are gone. One of the critical points that I want to make about this is that no matter what they tell us about the systems that are in place, no matter what they tell us about the guarantees that the system provides, the system is always subject to both human error and subject to the orders of the corporation as to how often they will send people out to actually check whether or not something is happening. What happens is gradually in these systems they become more and more and more negligent. For the first while, they'll be out there inspecting every time they get a chance. And in fact, under circumstances like we have in the city of Burnaby as a result of a spill, they're checking all the time. They're walking up and down that line all the time trying to prove to us they really do care. But in Sumas, where there was no pressure, the same reaction occurs again. And this has happened over and over and over again. That no matter what rules are put in place, they ignore their own rules. You'll see that the same thing happened in regard to Enbridge and the spill that occurred in New York. Is that again there was the same issue, is that they ignored their own rules, ignored everything that was told them about the problems that were coming up, and the spill continues. So I've got to tell you, as the mayor of the city of Burnaby, I don't trust them. I don't trust them when they tell me they're going to look after things. I don't trust them when they tell us that they've got procedures in place. I don't trust them that they will follow the procedures that are put in place by the National Energy Board. Now, you've probably seen that there's two applications going on simultaneously here in British Columbia. There's the Enbridge application in northern British Columbia, and that is a much sexier issue. It's going through pristine wilderness. It is something that's drawn support from all over the world because it may affect areas that are relatively pristine. It is an issue, I think, that's commanded the attention of a lot of agencies from around the world who are worried about what's going to happen to the wilderness. And as a result, the Kinder Morgan line, the twinning of the pipeline here, has kind of worked under the radar. In fact, my wife's an MLA with the New Democratic Party, and I'm talking to her all the time, but when is the NDP going to take a position on this line? They've been opposed they've been opposed to, yeah, and I mean, you know, mayors nag their MLA wife. I said, look, you guys made clear your position on Enbridge, but why is there no position being taken on the application by Kinder Morgan? And in effect, that's paralyzed the federal NDP too, to not come out aggressively and oppose the Kinder Morgan line. And I guess part of it is not wanting to appear to be in a position they oppose everything. But the reality is that having examined the National Energy Board policy and the policy of the federal government in regard to this, I can tell you one thing I've learned. There is no policy. This is the free market system at its worst. There is no idea of how they are going to deal with our national energy resources over the next decade. There is no plan as to where pipelines may go. When I went to the National Energy Board and suggested to them, look, why don't we have an inter-Canada pipeline? Why don't we serve the east coast of Canada? Let's do a pipeline that says, let's avoid tankers coming in from Saudi Arabia and from Iran to Canada on the east coast and tankers going out from the west coast. Let's just keep our oil within North America. So if we're going to provide oil, provide the oil from the tar sands to the people in Ontario and Quebec. It would make much more sense, given that we have this resource within our country, to do that. And if we're going to form a policy that deals with North America, then do the Keystone Line and supply the United States with it. But keep this oil off our waters. Keep it out of our tankers. Do not endanger us any more than we're already endangered by the movement of these kind of goods. The government of Canada says it's not our business to decide that. It's up to the multinational corporations to tell us what they want to do, because after all, them making money is far more important than our Canadian identity, and you should be aware of that. And so the reality is that when we ask them these questions, I asked the National Energy Board, well, what is the policy? What are you working under? What kind of guidelines do you have? I mean, we in cities make up policy for almost everything we do. Is that we won't even do dog control without having a policy in place, and yet here you are dealing with a substance that's inherently dangerous, that has a massive impact on our economy, and is something we know cannot be replenished. Why are you not establishing a national way in which we can look at this? And in fact, in many ways, having this kind of resource as a national resource that will continue to be available to people for the next 100 years or 200 years makes a lot more sense than how quickly you can sell it to somebody somewhere else. In fact, what's happened is the tar sands oil is so expensive that bitumen is so difficult to refine, is that we don't have refineries in Canada that are capable of dealing with the bitumen. That substance, because it is unusual, it's extremely viscous, that it's a substance that even requires you to be able to put in caustic chemicals to move it through the pipelines. Because that substance is so difficult to refine, it has to go offshore to American refineries in order to do it. They could never meet our environmental qualifications here in order to do the refining. So, the cost of the oil is, it only works if it's above $100 a barrel. So they're making deals with other countries. And they're making a big deal with China in order to export that oil. China can refine that oil, because China does not have the same rules in regard to the environment that we do. They won't be under the same exigencies that we are. So oil refining becomes much cheaper when you move that oil by tanker to China and then ship it back out from China or utilize it there. Unfortunately, the piece they're missing is that even if that oil is refined in China, we still get the impact of the pollution from the refining of that oil right here. If you think that the residue of the tsunami in Japan is moving quickly to Canada, try the pollution that's caused by refining bitumen in another country. So we are looking at not shifting this problem out of our airshed. We are simply pushing it farther away so that eventually it impacts our airshed. None of this is acceptable to Canadian people. Whenever you talk to people, when they begin to understand this issue, my community is beginning to understand it, there is no one who says this is a good idea for our economy, a good idea for our future, a good idea for our environment, a good idea even for the creation of jobs. They promised us jobs in Burnaby, by the way, if they do have this, as we're looking at another 6 positions in our city. I was thinking of making an announcement about how the mayor's restored the Canadian economy, but 6 positions seems a little weak for me to push that. And potentially there's $2 million in additional taxes, but I'm probably going to spend that on hiring new firefighters. So the reality is that none of these so-called advantages come to fruition for us, is that we're put into a position where we are unable to defend the interests of our own city. We are in a position where the voices of our citizens may be completely drowned out by the voices of multinational corporations lobbying in Ottawa. We're put into a position where the values that we hold sacred and we work so hard to protect, both in local government and with our First Nations, that those are vulnerable to decisions that are made in the interest not of Canadian people, but in the interests of multinational corporations who hold no affinity to any nation whatsoever. They don't care about anything but money and the production of money. And so why are we as Canadian people allowing our destiny to be determined, our future to be determined by people who don't give a damn about whether or not our citizens are successful or not? The reality for me and the disappointing aspect of all of this is that we don't have enough people standing up and saying no.
It's obviously, as Mayor and Chief Ian has said, that it is all about money. And it's all about somebody benefiting directly from our own resources. I'd like to further thank Mayor Corrigan for saying what you need to do as citizens of whatever city you're from is write those letters. Your voice is important because it'll come from you personally, your own passion. If this is what you believe, that this expansion has to stop, it can't go ahead, it's your voice that will call out those leaders. We need our leaders to be leaders. They need to look to the future and figure out how we are going to become less dependent on these fossil fuels, because they will run out. Bill Good asked me on the radio this morning, what about your grandchildren? Because I shared with him my story about being a grandma. And I said, well, we need to start getting busy now and prepare for when my granddaughter is my age, when my granddaughters are my age, so that they won't have to worry about the toxicity of what we're putting into our planet. The other thing I would love for young people to stand up and say is that these issues like this are way bigger than politics. It's beyond politics. Politicians are only going to say what they can to get your votes. Your pressure on them will make them move. Didn't Obama win with the youth vote? Think about it. Your voice is important. Where you are in your life right now is, the world is your oyster. Go with it. Protect it. Stand up with your elders. Stand up with the leaders that are there saying, hey, stop. We're putting too much pressure on our resources. And we know, well, I don't know personally, but we know that there are renewable resources out there that we can use. We just have to turn ourselves around and look back to learn from the mistakes that we've made. Because each generation has worked to improve the life of their children and their children's children. Well, maybe we've gone too far. Maybe we've become a little too greedy. Now it's time to stop and take stock. Think about what you want for your children and your children to come, grandchildren to come.
Good afternoon. Hoitcha siamalot, the awanachtens frauen, with chachach ti chaislachum ti nuchsaisen ti slolum ti skamal. Thanking my relative Wendy for sharing that beautiful paddle song, because it's very fit for today's gathering that we are all in the same canoe and that we are all honoring the sacredness of the water. I want to thank Carlene and to Sarah and the organizers for inviting me to be here. I'm really proud of the students here at CapU and the leadership that you're showing all of us. Really impressed with the Cap the Pipeline and the tagline here. That's pretty awesome. The Squamish people, we've lived here for innumerable generations, for millennia. This land has sustained our peoples. We are the direct descendants of those people, the family with Tsalewatos, the Khumatkoyam, and all the Coast Salish people. We are intricately connected through our lineages and our connection to these lands. I'm always happy to come to the university here. We are right atop of one of our villages of Chechelhuet, which is the name of the river, of the Seymour River, and the village that our people will continue to live and occupy just below the hill here. Capilano, as you all know, is the name of one of our great war chiefs, Capilano, whose name connects way back. The Lanoch name is an ancient suffix that connects to our people pre-glaciation, prior to the ice ages covering these parts of the world. So we're not going to be defined by some scientist theories that try and tell us who we are and where we come from. We are the people of this land, and we will continue to uphold the integrity of the stewardship that's been bestowed on us by our ancestors. So my name is Cholek, and Cholek was one of the sons of Chatzlanoch, who some of you may know as Kitsilano. My lineage, born and raised in the village over here of Aslaan, just near the sea bus in Lonsdale there. My chieftainship name is Sukyo Siam, and I come from the village of Kakelchen. You're going to be quizzed at the end. So Kakelchen is a small village just north of Gibsons in Howe Sound, in Atkatsum, known as Howe Sound. And it's always an honor, again, just to share a little bit of who we are and where we come from as Skopmish. We are opposed to the Trans Mountain project. We don't believe in grandfather clauses that there's already an existing line, because not once have the Squamish or Tsleil-Waututh been consulted or accommodated on the impacts, the cumulative impacts that the pipeline is already impacted, adversely affected our way of life, and alienated us from our lands and territories without any decision making or recognition of Aboriginal rights and title. We're not against economy. We're all for economy. We've always utilized the best tools available to us as First Nations people. We had a very strong economy that spanned the whole Cascadia zone all the way to California, up through the Alaska Panhandle and well into the interior through trade networks pre-contact with European cultures. We come from Taswats Tsidza, which are professionals. We have many disciplines of professionals in our traditional societies, from canoe carvers called Chatwaith, to Tlatnayim, known as high alpine specialists, to the tool makers, and every woman, man, and family had a role and a responsibility. So today we've been dispossessed of that. We no longer go to Grouse Mountain and gather the the wool of the mountain goats. We simply go down to a superstore here and buy our blankets and stuff. We no longer go down to False Creek to hunt Kayach, where the elk were once bountiful, because they've been extirpated from that part of our territory due to the advent of settlers coming in and establishing this beautiful city of ours, Vancouver. So we've endured and witnessed decimation in a very short period of the long spans of our timeline. When our stories connect us back to this land thousands of years, this last 1791 until now, with the catalyst of change that colonization has represented, has seen a very adverse effect to our well-being, our health. We've been reduced to a small pittance of our population, where we have maybe a dozen fluent speakers of our language today, out of 3,700 people. And in the 1800s, our villages were decimated through epidemics. So the small village down Thakthokwaiten, where Kinder Morgan currently is, and the village of Tatumson, which is at the head of the inlet there in what is Ioko, those areas were hammered in the early days by epidemics. So the people had to go to the bigger villages of Tumtameukton, out in Belcara, and Atsnach, which is, of course, down here in Tsleil-Waututh main village, and Huayhuay and Chechahuek, and the people had to survive. So you can imagine the shock and the trauma that our people endured through the 1800s, and you compound that with the Indian Act and forced assimilation, the attempted subjugation of our people by the federal government of Canada that continues to marginalize and alienate our people through laws such as Bill 38, I believe it is, and Bill 45, FIPA, and all of these blatant attacks on Aboriginal rights and title that continue to try and marginalize us and dispossess us of our connections to our lands and our right to autonomy and decision making on our goals and objectives. We are pleased to see that we are making incremental progress with some levels of government and corporate relationships. We've been able to do our own land use planning through the Squamish territory, where we protected about 50,000 hectares of pristine wilderness. This represents about 8% of our territory that we call wild spirit places, that are the last old-growth forests in the Lower Mainland. And those areas are sacred. Anyone who walks in there would be hard not to feel that it resonates with beauty and it hums with power when we walk into those cathedrals. So our connection to the land is still intact, although we're seeing the continual, I guess, unaccountability of our government's policies and laws that affect all of us as Canadians. We're seeing that in the fish farms and making our salmon, the wild stock, swim through these fish farms. We're seeing that it definitely has impacts, that the ISO virus has been known to DFO since the 90s. So we ask, where is the accountability? With Harper continuing to loosen the laws around DFO and science by scrapping a lot of those types of standards that we would expect as Canadians, only opens the door to big business to expedite projects like Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain proposed project, as well as Enbridge. So it leaves us with little alternative when we've been so marginalized and treated as stakeholders in our own land, but to have to step forward and say, we oppose this type of activity that will continue to erode the well-being of not only us, but our future generations, which is your future generations. So we've been working very diligently with the Coast Salish Gathering, which is transboundary, the Canada-US tribes of the Coast Salish, that we've been dissected in half by this artificial line called the border, and that we're coming back and reaffirming our ties, that we are Coast Salish first and foremost, and we have a responsibility and a duty to uphold the integrity of the Salish Sea. We're seeing whales come back into Howe Sound. In the last couple of years, we're seeing the grey whales, the Quinace, and the biomass of herring coming back in Tumhout in the moon of March. That brings back the fish. And that's something we could celebrate, that we're able to come back to our sustenance and our connection to the land and inspire our youth to who and what they are, and to try and forge an economy out of that. Not to allow others to generate wealth at our expense, but to ask ourselves, does this meet our goals and objectives? If we look at our land use plan, we look at the revitalization of the Salish Sea and the impacts to salmon, does this type of project meet our criteria? And the quick analysis and due diligence that we've been able to work on would indicate that it doesn't. It does not harmonize with our vision for our lands or for our future. And we'd ask ourselves, would you be interested in equity? Would it be 33.3 that would do it for you? And that's a question that we certainly have to look to our life givers, we have to look to our children, we have to say, what price tag can you put on the Salish Sea? So this really opens up another fundamental question for us as the Indigenous people of this land, is what role do we have in the port? This is a major port of Canada. It's a major port in a global context. We recognize the value of our real estate, that it's valuable in a global context. So what we do today will someday be traditional. Are we going to, I guess, establish this type of business that goes from 300,000 barrels a day to what we've seen their intention is to go to 1.2 million barrels a day, even though they're right now saying it's 700,000. That only shows me that the objective is to grow. It's to grow an economy, to mass exploitation of the tar sands that has impacts to the water table, to the Mackenzie Delta, to all of those impacts to the Lubicon Cree and others that we're seeing cancer rates raised by 33% for many of the tribes, the extirpation of caribou, all of those impacts. We say, where is the accountability? So those are issues, fundamental issues that we ask ourselves, not only as First Nations against government or against industry. It's what is the value that this is bringing to our people if we're going to continue to just send out our raw materials to Asia and other countries. We've seen it in fisheries, we've seen it in forestry, we've seen the heydays come and go where people have made their billions and they leave us as the people here in this region to bear the brunt of the impacts. As First Nations, we're sick and tired of that. We're continuing to implore, where is the honor of the Crown? That's a facade. There is no honor of the Crown in their dealings with First Nations people, or with the general public for that matter, in the way that they're ramming these omnibus bills through their majority government right now. I think they need to be held accountable to that, and it's the voters that are going to make a difference, and it's us forming these types of dialogue and discussions to say, what are our alternatives? What is our vision for the future in this area? It's not only the scenario of an oil spill, it's also the cumulative impact that we have to ask ourselves. We live in an area that has major potential for magnitude of earthquakes to occur, and we have to ask ourselves, what are the safety standards that these pipes are built to? Will they rupture? Will they spill? And where's the shutoff valve? Is it computerized? So we need to know some of those things, and of course industry is going to tell you it's all safe and it's all good, but yet we're seeing oil spills regularly across North America that are costing billions of dollars, and that impact tourism, they impact real estate values, they impact health. These pucks that they sink, these bitumen, end up releasing chemical reactions when they hit the water. The heavy oils sink down to the bottom and choke out a lot of the intertidal zones, and the other chemicals become airborne, which immediately make people nauseous, and then again you see cancer rates rising. And there's evacuation zones of about 50-kilometer radius, which would basically be all of the Lower Mainland and good parts of Vancouver Island. So we have to ask ourselves, are we equipped for that when we're scrapping Coast Guard and we're downgrading Environment Canada and we're really loosening the laws to allow water to be privatized in Canada and mass exploitation of mining, gas, and oil. These are just new heydays. So it's obvious to us as First Nations that it only continues to grow. It's not just a Canadian problem, it's a global issue of human continuing to fight for limited resources, that they are finite, and it's always a survival mentality that let's get rich and let's look after our own interests, and it doesn't matter about the 7 generations ahead of us. So I don't know how much time or what you'd like to dialogue, but I'm open to continuing to support the work that you're doing here at the university. I think that it's really important. I'm doing my master's at SFU right now in business, so it's not that I'm opposed to business. Again, I recognize the value of my territory here as prime real estate. It always has been, with the Fraser River and the bounty of salmon stocks that have sustained us for thousands of years. It continues to be an important part of the world, and we don't want to see it just be abused and used in this fashion that will benefit big business and their billions of dollars, and not see any... why should we support abject poverty being imposed on Indigenous peoples in this land? Because that's exactly what it is. We don't have any millionaires in our tribe, and that's not because we don't know how to do business. It's not because we're lazy or drunks. It's not because we're afraid of competition. We've been completely shut out of every industry where we're the ones that started the ports, we're the ones that started the forestry and the commercial fisheries in this part of the world, and we've been shut right out of those industries. So it's not that we're opposed, again, to business. It has to be done in a way that incorporates our worldviews and our values and our love of this land. Western models of management have completely removed spirituality from their vocabulary because it's an encumbrance and a nuisance factor to have to look after spiritual contexts in Western management. They just simply want to go to the bottom line, which is profit-driven. Everything has to be profitable, otherwise why do we do it as humans? It has to have value, but at what expense? Are we pushing a pipeline and environmental impacts for our future generations? So those types of things are interesting to me, to continue hearing your ideas and your thoughts on those types of impacts. I really want to commend Tsleil-Waututh. They've really taken the lead on really being vocal on this issue. We've been working together to some degree over the last number of months with Save the Salish Sea campaign, and working with a lot of the other groups that have a vested interest in this. Some of the local government and others that have become very vocal about the Crown's ability to impose these types of things on our peoples, and again subjugate First Nations and treat us as stakeholders in our own land. So those things are unacceptable, and we're definitely going to speak up against it.
Hi everybody, my name is Sam Harrison. I'm a student at Prince of Wales Mini School in Vancouver, which is unfortunately in session on Thursdays. So. But basically, it makes me really happy to see all these people here. It's a really beautiful campus, and I'm glad that you invited me to come talk. So why am I here? This is a good place to start. In November of 2011, my sister Sophie and I started a group called Kids for Climate Action. At the time, we knew next to nothing about activism or organizing for political change. One day, my sister just kind of decided, hey, let's organize a youth rally to get action on climate change before the Cancun Climate Summit, which in the end was not too much of a success. So we had about a month, but after a month of furious organizing and contacting people, the day finally came. This was the first event we've ever held. 35 people show up.
Great.
This was our big thing. So that wasn't quite the massive youth calling that we were hoping for. But instead of giving up, we pressed forward, And that was, the start of what Kids for Climate Action is. Now, a little over 2 years later, basically we've had 4 climate change themed flash mobs, thousands of petition signatures. This year we had our second Ride for Our Future. About 45 of us biked to Victoria to deliver a petition calling for action on climate change. Basically, we were greeted by Ida Chong and Rob Fleming, MLAs, and pretty much they agreed to present it to the Assembly on our behalf. And we've come a long way, and what this tells me is that, if the Ride for Our Future this summer is what a bunch of high school kids from 14 to 16 can do with a month and a megaphone, I'm really excited to see what a group of university students can do. So, one of the most common questions I get is, why are you doing this? You're a 16-year-old kid, why aren't you, sitting around watching TV like everyone else at your school? And, well, frankly, a lot of the time when I'm surrounded by my apathetic classmates, the answer is, I have no idea. But, it's times like this, and frankly, most of the time, the real answer is, it's that I'm worried. Well, what you said, we should avoid euphemisms. It's not I'm worried, I'm terrified, I'm scared. I'm not really happy with the world that we've inherited from my parents and your parents. Basically, we don't live on that planet anymore. We live on a much warmer planet. We live on a planet where the sea levels rise, where the oceans acidify, where drought kills millions. This is not a nice place. I'm scared because this is just the beginning. We've begun to see the effects in it right now. Climate change is not a thing of the future. It's, it's happening now, and if it's this bad here, I don't want to, see what it's going to be like in 50 years. And, through all of this action and activism with this group, I've discovered something kind of cool. Youth have a superpower. Basically, if anyone under the age of 25 says to someone over the age of about 40, I'm not satisfied with the world I'm inheriting, it will immediately get their attention, which is pretty cool, because we are the ones who have the most at stake. And, the people who make our decisions, our politicians, our mayors, they need to know this. And with good reason, because since society came about, well, modern society, basically every generation has made it their goal that what they want to give to their kids or to their younger generation is a world that was better than the one they grew up in, which is, an admirable goal, and until just about now, we've been doing a pretty great job. But the thing is, when you live in a society with an economy based on non-sustainable resources, infinite growth just doesn't work, because eventually you crash into a ceiling. We're trying to grow upwards, but what happens is we continue to develop these resources, which we don't have an unlimited supply of. Instead of going upwards, we're digging ourselves downwards, and we're just keep digging down until eventually whatever's above us is going to come down upon us. That's not something I want to have happen, which is why I'm here. Basically what it is that we can't keep doing this, because by building things like the Kinder Morgan pipeline, the Enbridge pipeline, by developing the tar sands, we only put ourselves farther down, instead of soaring upwards, leaving behind a better world with a sustainable, healthy economy. We're going somewhere where instead of, taking into account the well-being of future generations, we're taking money instead, which is why it's really cool to be here, because this is where the opposition starts. And pipelines are a threat to our way of life, on multiple levels. First, oil spills. They're bad, obviously. Basically, if you take the most beautiful place on Earth, in the world, which I think is British Columbia, I think it's pretty great, and you take one of the grossest substances known to man, or humankind, and you separate them by a thin sheet of metal, that's just, the logic of that baffles me, taking something so great and something so bad, and separating them by something so small. So oil spills are bound to happen. It would be foolish to let a company with such a iffy spill track record build a pipeline through our province. We build these pipelines, spills will happen, it's going to happen. We can see it happening, so if we let it happen, we can call it karma. But, so that's bad. But the thing is, an oil spill, the time that the oil is not being spilled, it's still bad, because if everything goes what, these people at these big oil companies see as according to plan, what happens is instead it gets burned. And when it gets burned, it throws off the natural stability we've had in our climate for the past 10,000 years. Which is, pretty bad as well. But that's bad everywhere, not bad here. So when I see those ads saying, with increased security in pipelines and double-hulled tankers, I still don't want these pipelines. Yeah, sure, that may lower the risk of oil spills, but it increases the risk of climate change. So they're more than an environmental issue. They're an economic issue. Climate change is not good for the economy. They're a human issue. It's not good for life on Earth. And as far as I know it, it's, it's not actually weird to want to hand down a pleasant planet to the people that, are coming after you. I'm not a radical environmentalist. I am a 16-year-old kid who's, worried about his future. The radicals here are the ones at companies like Enbridge and companies like Kinder Morgan, companies like Shell, who think that it's actually a good idea to have the biggest experiment we've ever had on this planet, which is to change the chemical composition of the atmosphere. To use these resources, which we don't have unlimited supplies of, and become dependent on them. So either we're going to run out, or things are going to get so bad that we're going to need to change. But I'd really like it that we, figured out that we need to change before things got really, really bad. One of my personal heroes, Bill McKibben, phrased this nicely, and I want to leave you with this. He said, "This is the largest thing that humans have ever done on this planet. The only thing that needs to be bigger is the movement to stop it." I think that's pretty, sums it up pretty well. And what makes me so happy is that that's the movement that's starting here. Because we are the ones who are going to tell our government, we're going to tell the people who make the decisions that this is not okay. It's not what's best for our country. Woo!
I'd like to thank the Communications 433 class. I believe Cat the Pipeline was a great success. And of course, all the speakers that came here, Michael. And here's Michael. He can give a statement to you.
I'm just going to go and
There's a little necklace here when I was working at the Museum of BBC Museum of Anthropology. These beads here, they evaluated them. I dug them out myself when I was working at a rehabilitation center. Now what they told me is these beads are actually between 700 and 900 years old. They are original Hudson's Bay trading beads. On the bottom of it I have hanging from one of my late elders. It's from Sundance. It's charitable talents put together. These are approximately 100 years old as well. All of my things that I wear are handed down to me from my ancestors. So I wear them with pride and make sure that all of my things are said as they taught me. As I grew up, that's the purpose of repeating our oral history is to make sure that it's done properly. And I respect the kindness that I did to them, but I will do my best. Tamak Kutsi is what it's called.
So, as a former Capilano College student, now Capilano University, it's really, really exciting to see how much things have changed here. When I first came here, we didn't even have a recycling program on campus. This was a campus that definitely cared about the natural world, that cared about social justice issues, at least in terms of the values that were represented in the the bylaws and the mission statement. But in terms of the day-to-day, really the student union was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the university wasn't doing as much as it could. But in the years since then, it became one of the first anti-war post-secondary institutions in Canada. Has taken huge strides towards really welcoming in the arts community. There's now this big, beautiful First Nations space and a student union presence right in the library. And I know that a lot of this has been done as sort of good green building projects. And I just really love to see this institution, living its values and modeling its values. And I hope that that it continues to grow and even get better in the next 10 years.